Hello, summer class. We are here to talk about your Q&As. We got some great questions from the teams, and I'm going to make an attempt at discussing them. I love these questions because I think we could find some themes and patterns between different people in the way that they would answer it, but there would be some things that would kind of ring true from perspective to perspective. And I love questions that have that level of complexity, which is one of the themes to our questions. There are two questions here, which I think take a little bit longer to answer. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. Let me just think as we go through. All right, so from the summer bummers, I'm going to skip the first question because it's a really complicated question, which was water crisis and Cynefin theory. And I love, Jen, that you brought that in because you knew about my expertise, and my PhD is in water, and that's kind of my world, and I use Cynefin a lot. So I'm just still trying to think of how to answer that in the quick way, I guess. All right. So question number 2, how to talk to someone with authority, or a supervisor, someone who has more power. And I liked this question a lot because I feel like we do this all the time. And it's not just how to talk to someone, it's really trying to get them to understand your perspective. So I think first things first, you can't really change someone's mind. You can't change people, but you can change the way you interact and becoming aware of your interactions. So I liked the context of this question because you gave a lot of examples of how you were trying to communicate and the way your supervisor was reacting. And in some ways you were successful, and in other ways you were still feeling like there was a gap in what you were saying to what the other person was doing. I hope I understood that correctly from the meeting. I guess for all of us, when we're talking to someone who has more authority and power, and we need them to kind of understand what we're trying to say, you really want to look for opportunities for curiosity, or in your regular practice of a meetings or check-ins or huddles, whatever is happening that's part of the rhythm or best practices of your already established workplace, that if you do not have the power, one thing you can do, and it's an extra step on you, you are taking the emotional burden and you are on to try and get your perspective understood, or whatever it is that you were trying to explain, is to create different pathways. So when someone is listening, you really want to imagine that they really are only hearing the first 30 to 60 seconds of what you said. And most of us will check out, and some of us check out faster, some of us can stay in the game longer, but you really want to put the most important information right at the beginning, and then allow for explanations or context to come through dialogue, depending on that person's engagement with wanting to know more about that. But most of us start with context. We start with this problem, and then the solution is the most important thing, which we want someone to understand. And by then we've lost them. They're gone. Boop, boop, boop. So really front loading your emails, front loading your dialogue, which is a really different way to talk, but really to start to develop a tactic to that. It might feel like you're being blunt, and for people who are high context, who really need to build in that contextual experience, this is going to be the most difficult thing to do. However, you can still have context. You just want to flip when you do it. So I'm going to come right out with what I have to say, and then I say why I said that. And another, if you don't have room in the conversation, you're like, hey, I want to bring this up, that the paperwork, when people ask you about this paperwork, I want you to send them to this website, or just ask them to contact me, and you're not sure if they really heard what you said, then start developing a practice, a habitual practice of always following interactions with a written piece. And I know we're always trying to minimize communication, but hey, great meeting today. These are the points, just to remind you, these are the points we covered. And you include, and we decided that when someone asks you this question, to ask them to do A, B, and C. And you include that in a document, right? After a dialogue. And that's one way that you can never be sure if someone is going to understand it. You're never be sure if someone gets it, or perspective, it's going to be problem solving. But when you add a couple of these extra communication steps, you might be able to mitigate error and repetition. And then when it comes up in performance reviews, usually in performance reviews, you're asked to do something first, like fill out a form, review, self-evaluation, and then sometimes you have a sit down with your supervisor. You can keep track of this record that you've been keeping, and then use that as the opportunity in positive ways, not to create blame, but just to be like, oh, so this was really important, and I'm glad I really appreciated the way that we had a dialogue, and you asked me a question about this, and I want to continue to blah, 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 with, So you have to kind of embed it in these processes. I would say you're developing norms when the way you talk with a supervisor or someone in authority, and you want to be consistent and create reliability and build those elements of trust. Now, that doesn't mean that person is doing that your way. It might just be one way. Sometimes we're lucky enough to have a supervisor who actually wants to squash the low power distance and create dialogues, but not all of us are blessed with those type of people in charge of our work. And I've definitely been there before, more than once. And sometimes I've been lucky enough. But that's one of the reasons why you're in a program like organizational leadership, to really learn how you can show up in those situations when you do have power. So the next question from the Summer Bummers was about hybrid communication and work. And I thought that was a great question, because I felt like it really fits right into the Cynefin theory, the question, even though that wasn't really a part of the question, because when we were in the pre-COVID time, in the before time, we had these established ways that we created communication. And just because it was the before time doesn't mean we had it figured out then. There were definitely toxic norms or different or dysfunctional team dynamics that were going on in the workplace. However, there were these, because we were in person, we had more opportunities to do informal check-ins with people and figure out those pathways of dynamics with people that we trusted. And as soon as we got home and we were in this place of isolation, even if we were on Zoom, we lost a lot of informality, which was one of the ways that we stayed sane in these in those sometimes dysfunctional workplaces. So how do you create informality in hybrid situations of work? Well, this is one of the reasons why we're getting that word hybrid. Like maybe we should be coming in a couple times a week, but sometimes hybrid means like we always need someone in the office, so we're tag teaming that in-person office, and we're still losing that informal dialogue. So this is where the Cynefin theory comes in, because I think this is a complex situation. Obviously, COVID-19 never happened before. We didn't have this level of technology, even in other crisis situations. So it's definitely not in the obvious domain. And there are businesses that have been doing hybrid work. There were e-campuses set up. There were all situations that have been working on it. But because this is so unique, I think it belongs in complex. And when you're trying to develop best practices from complex, that means we're thinking about that. How do we make sense of our world? And we need what's the word I want to use for this? This is that we want to create a learning process that emerges from safe fail patterns, right? So we create learning experience that have safe and fail. Now, a lot of us are in jobs where, I'm sorry, I can't fail at my job, right? This is what provides me a roof over my head and allows me to live my life and provide for my families, provide for myself and my health care. All of these structures, it feels like a lot of risk to live in complexity for that safe fail learning process. So because I think a lot of what's missing in hybrid is that informality piece, we can create a lot of formal practices, right? So what about this class? This is a class that is completely online. All of us are in different locations. And I'm curious about this too. So I loved it when this question came up, because I've been having to deal with this as a teacher during this time of shifting norms. So what I think about when I think about formal communication in the classroom, it's me talking to the class, right? Come into the classroom and I will stand at the front of the room and you will all sit there and I will talk to you. Well, I don't have that anymore, but I've got this great technology that allows me to talk about the things I would talk about at the front of the room. Of course, I am lacking someone raising their hand and stopping me to clarify something. I'm lacking nonverbal transactions that allow me to understand if I need to stay longer in a process or I'm losing you and I need to segue to a new topic or a different example. Things like that becomes part of that adaptability and flexibility of the classroom and face-to-face interactions. So it's not perfect, but it still creates a placeholder, right? Then I have office hours, and many of you I'm meeting over Zoom or you call me on the phone. It's been great. I love it when I can talk to each of you about different things. And that's also another formality though, right? Those are all formal ways that we are transplanting what would happen on a college campus into this world of technology communication. The informal parts, well, informal communication looks like the way students come and talk to me before class when I'm coming in. They might come to the front of the room. Oh, I just wanted to let you know, right? Or I have several students. I always have several students who stay after class. In the before time, boy, the flood of students that would stay. I used to end class 10 or 15 minutes early just because I knew there would be a line of people that would want to come up and ask me a clarifying question. And that was the informal part of me adapting. So how do I do that here? I can invite you to chat with me. I can give you my phone number and ask you to give me a call, right? Or text me. But it's difficult. I'm still trying to figure it out as well. I think the team meetings is the best way that I've come up it has, obviously it has a lot of formality to it, but it also has a little bit of informality. And I'm asking you to dialogue with each other, like these questions, stump the professor questions, or even creating your team name are ways that I'm trying to create more informality in a very technology driven formal structures. So that's something to think about how, and you can have too many, right? Sometimes we have a chat just for our workplace, and then we have our family chats, and then we have our social media situations. Like you could have too much of technology that you lean into. I think the same ways that we created informal and team building and community building in the before time can work now, especially now that we're past a lot of the imminent dangers of COVID-19, like having a required work party day where everyone comes in, or a brainstorming day, or how Pixar does, they have a day where you're not allowed to work on work at work. You're only allowed to work on what you want to do at work to try and fuel innovation. So, or having a retreat, so something in person, but it's maybe quarterly, maybe it's only twice a year you do it, or maybe if you have the power and you can afford it, you're just doing it once a month. I mean, that's what you're deciding as leaders, is what's needed for your team. And you can think about situations you might be in where you don't get to make decisions like that, but you can start the wheels working of what you think would actually help you in that context. Okay. Those are all this is complex situations. The other second half of that questions was about AI and emerging AI linguistic systems, which I really have not developed. I'm working on researching and I'm learning, but I haven't really developed a full thought on how I think about that. And some of you are in the deep end of using AI already on your jobs or with your schoolwork and things like that, which, just like I am, I'm experimenting with it. I do think with AI that it's an unknown, which means that we're tipping on that cliff into chaos, which a lot of people are ringing the alarm, going, what? We're on the cliff of chaos. AI is going to tip us into chaos. And there's lots of theories of how that's going to happen. However, just like we know now with chaos that we need to either move into complicated or most likely complex ways of understanding it, if you're already in situations where you can be experimenting and making sense of this new world that has these linguistic models to assist us, you are going to be ahead of, or being able to join those conversations of how AI should be managed. So, for example, I have a lot of teachers that are very afraid of AI and chat GPTs and all of the different ones that are emerging. And they want to go straight to best practices and shut it down. Not allowed. Let's turn it off. We need to stop. However, I know whether we like it or not, change is happening. And so I got a chat GPT right away and I use it constantly. And I'm using it constantly so I can learn what it is and I can figure out the best way to move into that safe fail system so that I can so that I can help my students and help myself be better at what I'm doing with these new emerging linguistic platforms. So I don't have a great answer for that yet, except start experimenting. All right. I think also, okay, I have one more thought about AI now that I think about it, is that at the beginning of this class, we had to do our core values, and core values are really the ethics that make you trustworthy. And trustworthiness is really important. So when we have new things like these linguistic platforms or AI, or we're all of a sudden in hybrid workplaces, I want you to think about your own core values that ground you and anchor your identity. So as you interact with the unknown and things are tipping into chaos, you should have an identity anchor that cannot be shaken with whether you're working from home or you're working from work, or whether right, that you are not taking advantage and moving into unethical places with these new things that come at us. Okay, I probably could have said that better, but that's just another thought I want to add to that question. All right, summer bummers, I'm off to the Wolf Squad now. Hi, Wolf Squad. At what point is risk-taking counterproductive? I thought this was a great question because we are putting risk-taking as a really high value. And there is, and we put it up there because we want innovation, we want creativity, we want successful and new ideas and emergence. And the only way to do that is with taking risk. However, if people don't feel safe, creativity gets smothered in unsafe situations, in dysfunctional situations, in situations where we're overexhausted or burned out, which is coming up. We're going to talk about burnout soon. So we really need to for us to understand if risk-taking it's a good time to take risks or not, is to really understand the tone of your organization or your group that you're working with. And that means you need to be listening to those micro stories and that grapevine, that informal grapevine, to understand where's people's level of safety, right? Now, if you're just saying, we need more creativity and we better do it, and there's a deadline, so go. That's really not the language of complexity. And we're really emerging our understanding complexity. David Snowden talks about this, that if we are constantly violating expectations, we are losing trust. So it's a balance between predictability and novelty. And novelty is energizing. It's actually can create a lot of motivation. But if everything is always spontaneous and new and different, we can get a feeling of the uncertainty of it can start to shut us down, because we're like, wait, what's happening now? Wait, what's happening now? Now, remember, that's teetering into chaos when we have too much uncertainty. And remember, some leaders thrive on that. They want, sometimes really dysfunctional or toxic leaders will constantly be coming out with something else to be afraid of, something else to be afraid of. Be careful of this, be careful of this. And that creates us moving into places of groupthink and a constriction or restriction of wanting change or innovation. And especially if the leader wants to control where innovation comes from, or that they feel like they are the only ones who can be innovative and everyone else just needs to follow along, right? Really toxic leadership will create systems like that. I would actually say what's happened when Elon Musk took over Twitter, we saw a dysfunctional leadership, as we saw every day, these announcements that was making that company crumble. And the people in that organization were they had fallen in, there was no teetering on the cliff. They were in chaos. But the way Elon Musk was constantly making announcement after announcement after announcement of layoffs, or I'm going to shut this down, or what's happening in the blue check, and now anyone can say what, we're not going to censor anything on Twitter, now X, that it was keeping people in places where there was too much risk, so much unknown, that people were not able to move into places of problem solving or for innovation and creativity. I hope that's an applicable example. So if you're asking me at what point is risk-taking counterproductive, it's, are we violating expectations too much? Is it not a safe space to be creative or innovative? And are you listening to the informal stories or those micro stories to find out the tone of the group? All right, so Wool Squad asks a great question about gender and communication. Oh, I love talking about gender and communication. It's one of my favorite topics, which is why this might also end up in its own video, because I don't know how pithy I can be. I just know too much about it. So I'm just going to move to the next one, which I think resonates well with the first question. Can Ephin and individuals respond to fear? I think that's how to mitigate. I have everything written down from the so can Ephin and individual responses to fear, how to mitigate this fear in leadership choices. Oh, this goes right with the other one. Right? So we are asking how, when a leader is averse to risk-taking, how do we get that leader to create more trust in processes, in complex process? So remember, complex is the process where we are going to be getting the most mindset of a tool needed to create more learning and more innovation. That exists in complexity. All right, so I'm going to pause because I just heard my dog. I'll be right back if I can find the pause button. Okay, I'm back. Hi, everyone. I actually just realized this question about how to give leaders more courage to move into unknown situations also kind of goes with Team Common Ground's a question about how to move from complicated to complex, because I feel like when leaders can't live in the clear, obvious realm or domain of the Cynefin theory, then the one place they're going to go from chaos is up to complicated, because complicated has a lot of data, it has a lot of research, there's someone who's been there before, so we want to get that expert in here, we want to get a consultant in here, right? And so that means that they also are having a little bit of trouble moving to more risk in that complex domain. So because those questions are similar, I'm going to kind of couple them together for my answer. When we talk about complexity, so you're in a leadership program, you understand this new emerging idea about leadership and followership and making our followers into leaders as well. But there's an element, especially when you have any authority or decision-making power, there's an element of politics to the situation. So not only are you thinking about how to best serve the people you work with, how you're moving everyone's in a project management way towards goals and productivity, but you're also trying to look at the meta picture of things, which means sometimes, even when you're listening and you're really engaged, you have to say, no, we can't move there. And that's a lot of the ways that leaders or people in positions of decision making have to manage those situations. There's an element of politics, for lack of a better word. And so to pull into complexity, depending on the situation, and this would be if you aren't the decision maker, it's a way to suggest it, is to create a space for complexity. Maybe the whole organization is can't live there, or something about the way your team is driving towards goals all the time and deliverables that you can't be in a safe fail space, but maybe you can create a space for it. And that's like when a project is over or you do hit a deadline and you're always getting ready for the next thing, but is there a window for that post-mortem where we can look back and learn something from what just happened? What did work? What didn't work? What do we want to continue? What's moving into best practices, or what do we need to throw back into the soup and try something else out? Or another way to create complexity spaces is to assign people to, or what we would call advisors, who are, you can assign, and I wouldn't do too many if you're doing it this way, but you can assign a couple of advisors to check in with about how things are going, who might be more privy to those micro stories. And if you do a couple of advisors, you want one who has a certain level of expertise, right? Like, so if you are trying to get a deliverable out to a customer, someone who really knows your customer, right? That should be one of your advisees, someone who really knows the customer. And then you need someone, just like we've been studying, who maybe isn't as expert on what you're doing, but understands the impact it's going to have on your team, on the people, on the individuals of your team, and someone who has a really good perspective on that. And if you had those two people working, you can create more complex discussions. And then you begin the process of educating complexity. What is complexity? Why is it important? Why is it difficult to get to it, right? And it's basically a type of collaboration, which means you need time, you need perspective checking in and perspective taking. You need to make room for different opinions, or to make room for small failures, even if you can't do a big one, right? And always pick away at it. So educating for complexity. All right, so that's kind of the best way that I can think about to look at how to, from a leadership or going from complicated to complex. All right, so team common grounds. Another question you had was, when you have someone who is the CEO or the founder who's making the main decisions, I love that almost all of you are asking a lot of the similar questions, but this one is about how to move mindset from obvious to complex. So from the obvious, clear domain to complex, which I felt like my last answer kind of works for that as well. But it seems like this question has a little bit of a nuance because of the power piece of it. When I think of a CEO or a founder, I think of someone who had a vision and an idea and has that charismatic style that was able to get to a certain level of success with what they were doing. And that is really unique. And it means that someone has a lot of determination and resilience, and they have been through the process of failure over and over and over again. But for some reason, that person was able to keep going and move through those failures and learn and move to a place of learning for them, learning through them. So if they're now at a place where they're so big, I was just watching a movie about this. Oh, I was watching that movie Air, the new Nike movie with Matt Damon and Ben Affleck and Viola Davis, and it's about Michael Jordan and them making the Air sneaker. And Phil Knight, right? Matt Damon comes to that character, and there's the CEO founder, Phil Knight, and he's like, no, we can't do that. That's too risky, right? But Matt Damon actually has a conversation with him to push him towards a more risk and to try something that might be a failure. And of course, we will say for the company to get to the size it was already and the success level to even be in the conversation of creating a sneaker for an emerging athlete, that star athlete, genius athlete, when we're talking about Michael Jordan, of course, that there starts to become a constraint, right? That best practice is obvious. We're going to stay here because I've already been through failure, and success. And now now that I figured it out, here's the formula, and we're all going to live here. So I feel like that's why I like this question, because you are really asking that person to move back into failure, which takes a lot of courage to go back into that. And not all can do that. Sometimes they develop a comfort zone with that level of success and they want to stay there. But so whether you are that person or you are talking to that person, again, I think my answers from before are relevant. And we're talking about asking for space, a window or space so we're not asking for the whole organization, but for some space to open up for complexity to live. So this is, where do we have calls for innovation? How do we reward? How to reward and recognize failure and success? And that's why we talked about carrots and sticks, right? Because okay, we'll just stay where I am, and then I'll move to the next thought that's coming in my head already. It's how we ask questions, how we're curious, right? And this is one of the most important things I'm going to talk about in this whole video, is this idea of puzzled curiosity. So puzzled curiosity means you have to be confused. Confusion happens when we are in a place of a state of learning. And when we are focused on ourself and our reactions to confusion. Oh, I'm confused. And especially if you don't have any power and you're having to comply with someone else's vision and you're in a place of confusion, how do you react to that? When we're talking about being a leader, we're talking about living in the discomfort and being able to sit in discomfort of confusion and not just moving into anxious place. Often when we feel confusion or discomfort, we move into conflict. And when we're in conflict, that's when blame and shame and guilt and other emotions show up as and are weaponized in a way to protect self, right? And to protect my identity. I'm going to push and externalize blame, and I'm going to create shames. So for me to say, I want to move, when I'm asking someone else to move into complexity, or I'm asking myself to live in complexity, that means you're going to be confused. It's going to be uncomfortable. You're not going to know the answer. And we want that place of puzzled confusion in when it's safe, which means asking questions, which is why we talked a lot about asking questions this term. We're going to be in place of listening to understand. So that means you're going to make room for people to share their expertise with you in order to do that perspective piece of collaboration, so we can move towards actual solutions or things so we can make better sense of our world, probe, sense, and fail and try again, right? So deep listening needs to happen, not deep talking. And we have to be very, very aware to not move into groupthink. So when you're looking for your team of people to be in complex, you want to look for those people who are willing, who react to puzzles, react to confusion, react to the discomfort of the unknown in a way that they want to learn more. Oh God, this doesn't make any sense. Wait, what? Explain that again. What about in this situation? What would happen then? Wait, you had an example in there, and can you go back over that again? Like, what is their reaction to confusion? And that's really important to think about the people you're working with and how do they react to that. So when you're dealing with anyone, and whether it's the CEO, founder, or anyone on a team who wants everything to be back in that clear, obvious domain, they're really just trying to control their world, right? Like, I need control, and that can come from past experiences. This is why neuroscience is a really interesting field to merge, or the field of communication to merge with this, because we're curious about those things. But this clear and obvious is an illusion. It doesn't really exist. I'm just going to say it's an illusion, and it doesn't really exist. Even when we're in the best practices of something, every communication event, every situation is completely unique. It's never happened before. Even if it feels like your life is Groundhog Day, and especially when we were all stuck at home and we wake up and we're trying to get through our day, but we're always stuck in that little box of wherever we lived, that Groundhog Day thing is an illusion as well. And things are always different and changing. And it's when you are more mindful and present, and you're willing to do perspective checking, then when we tip into these other domains, we're more willing to show up for those situations of the unknown. All right. So I'm sure this is a long video. I apologize. I'll make chapters for each question to help you get through it. And I'll make a couple more videos for those really much more in-depth questions you had. Bye, everyone.